Politische Entwicklungen, Krisen und Veränderungen schlagen sich in künstlerischen Werken nieder. Manchmal offensichtlich intendiert, manchmal subtil, erst auf den zweiten Blick erkennbar. Die Moderne in der Ukraine entwickelte sich in äußerst turbulenten Zeiten und unter widrigen gesellschaftspolitischen Umständen. Die Ausstellung In the Eye of the Storm, Modernismen in der Ukraine, versammelt die bislang umfassendste Auswahl von Werken dieser Periode außerhalb der Ukraine und zeichnet die faszinierende Geschichte modernistischer KünstlerInnen in der Ukraine.
In the Eye of the Storm, modernism in Ukraine is very much about safeguarding some of the best masterpieces of modernism that we have in Ukrainian public collections at the time when Ukraine is targeted and cultural institutions in Ukraine are targeted by the Russians as well. It's a touring show that commenced in November 2022. Our first venue was Museum Thyssen-Bornemisza in Madrid. For the purposes of that exhibition, we took the first bunch of works out of Ukraine. And then after Madrid, it went to Cologne, to Museum Lwiw, then to the Royal Museums of Fine Arts in Brussels, in Belgium. So Belvedere here is the fourth venue of this tour. And after Vienna, it will travel to London. However, this exhibition is very different and very special because it's almost twice as big as all the previous iterations. And for the purposes of the show here, we've taken another bunch of works out of Ukraine. So the first shipping in November 2022 was extremely dramatic because if you remember back then, Russians were launching missile attacks on Ukraine pretty much on a daily basis. And it so happened that the day when we were shipping works out of Ukraine was one of the largest missile attacks. I think there were more than 100 missiles fired all over Ukraine that day. And so luckily, as the trucks with the artworks were moving through Ukraine, they were not in danger, everything was fine. But then when they stopped on the Polish border, that was also the day when a stray missile landed nearby on the Ukrainian-Polish border. So the border was shut, and it meant that the trucks were stuck on the border for an indefinite period of time. And it was a real feast of diplomatic action to try and accelerate the process so that the trucks could move through the border as swiftly as possible, which was done, thankfully, to the efforts of our colleagues in the diplomatic corpus. For this iteration, we also went to other regional museums in Ukraine. You will see works from the Dnipro Museum, from Poltava, from Odessa, and from Lwiw. And it was quite a difficult process to gather all of those works, to ship them to Kyiv, and then to ship them all together to Europe. But luckily, everything is here, everything is looking beautiful. And another thing that really needs to be pointed out is the effort of our colleagues in Ukraine who prepared the works for shipping, who restored some of the works, changed frames, made everything possible for them to look as beautiful as they do. And they're doing that in the most difficult circumstances when you have constant air raid alerts, missile attacks, power outrages, so no electricity very often. It really is a team effort, and we're super grateful to our colleagues in Ukraine for all of their dedication to this project. The period that we are covering with our exhibition is the first 3 decades of the 20th century. And that was a very turbulent moment in Ukraine's history when the borders were shifting all the time, when Ukraine was a battlefield between different imperial forces. And artists were very much at the forefront of those processes. And they were also very much involved in the process of when Ukraine had a shot at independence, of building statehood and constructing national cultural identity. And we can see that again now when artists and writers are going to the front lines and kind of either fighting the occupiers or they're there to document the war crimes and very much kind of part of this process of defying Ukrainian state. So There are definitely a lot of parallels also back then. So we end the exhibition in the early 1930s, and 1930s was a horrific period in Ukraine's history when the Stalinist purges were the highest, and many of the Ukrainian artists and writers, they were executed because they were perceived as nationalists. And so again, we see this parallel, a very sad one, between Ukrainian intelligentsia being executed in the 1930s and them dying at the hands of the Russian army today again. And this, in part, is what Ukrainians are fighting for, really, to preserve this cultural heritage.
Die in der Ausstellung versammelten Werke trotzten gesellschaftlichen wie künstlerischen Konventionen ihrer Zeit. Das macht sie damals wie heute zu Botschaftern einer modernen, auf kulturellen Werten aufgebauten Zivilisation.